Thank you for watching, and welcome back to another brand new episode of The Completionist. Castlevania has become one of my favorite franchises here on the show. I never had played one before I even started my career here as The Completionist. It took Pad the NES Punk to sit down with me and play the first game. And since then I went on to do Symphony of the Night and Super Castlevania 4, which is a remake of the original Castlevania on the SNES. Well, every time I go to a convention, whether it be in the States or internationally, I keep finding this game right here, Dracula X. It's rare, it's expensive, and it's a very often sought after game that many gamers haven't really been able to experience until recently with the Wii U Virtual Console. And so after a lot of debate and looking at YouTube numbers, I decided today to take a day off from doing something that's brand new and doing something that's more true to my roots as a retro gamer. Today, we're going to take a good look at Dracula X for the SNES. Let's begin. Yes! The Castlevania franchise has been a series that's always been blowing my mind with how hard and fun they've been. Yet, with the current state of YouTube, I have to do what's trendy, what's nostalgic, or what's notoriously hard. Within these parameters, Castlevania kinda balances back and forth between these things. And I got a feeling that this video isn't going to do gangbusters in terms of views. But I want you guys to know, every time I do a Castlevania game, it's an episode that I'm taking the time to do for me. Because I really have become a big fan of what this franchise was, and I've been having an awesome time playing with the ones I've done here on the show. So, this one's for me, and for those of you who love Castlevania games. And if you're watching YouTube, why do you keep changing your algorithms? Me and my YouTube brothers and sisters just want to make videos on what we love to do, but you're making it pretty hard and you want us to go to Twitch, it seems. Sorry, my soapbox moment is now over. Back in 1993, Konami released a Japanese-only installment of the Castlevania franchise for the CD add-on to the PC Engine, aka TurboGrafx-16, called Rondo of Blood. If you couldn't already tell by its musical title, Symphony of the Night is a direct sequel, which gives it some street cred, but Rondo of Blood is a great game on its own, and it's considered to be one of the better games in the series. However, when Konami supposedly ported it over to the Super Nintendo as 1995's Castlevania Dracula X, or Vampire's Kiss in Europe, the reception was a little bit less enthusiastic. But you can't really blame them because in the end, it turned out that they were two very different games. Huge portions of the content was changed out, swapped, or flat out removed, to the point that only some consider it to be a game worthy of the title Castlevania 5 on its own merit. But it's not even part of the main story canon. It exists, but it's not really there. Not to mention the fact that this game is one of the most rare on the Super Nintendo. I myself spent a pretty penny trying to find this bad boy for this video. Luckily for all of you out there, the Wii U version is available, so you can just download it today for cheap. In any case, according to reviews from the time, it looks like I've got a pretty tough game ahead of me, with a few branching paths leading me to a couple of different stages, bosses, and 3 different unique endings. I like that, it's simple, but I'm worried when even in the 90s they were saying this game was hard, especially because the last game in the series, Super Castlevania 4, wasn't that big of a challenge. What I am looking for is a tough challenge but with fair mechanics, where dying always feels like it's my fault, and enough depth to the game that I might be okay with turning around and beating it a few more times after finishing it once. And I hope my hard work is somehow rewarded. If Dracula X can do that for me, I'll be a happy little completionist. But let's be real, that's not gonna happen. This is goddamn Castlevania. The game starts in the most vampire-y setting imaginable, Transylvania in the Middle Ages. Apparently though, things have been pretty good for a while ever since Simon Belmont, famous Dracula hunter and whip-flinger arounder, sealed Dracula away a couple hundred years ago. Unfortunately, it turns out a small cult of townspeople who somehow got possessed by darkness were able to revive Dracula, who is still so mad at Simon for sealing him away, he plans on taking out his revenge on his only living descendant. A cool guy with nice tan arms called Richter. Dracula attacks the town and kidnaps not only Richter's girlfriend Annette, but also her sister Maria, and hides them in a castle as bait. Obviously, Richter isn't very happy about this, so he grabs his trusty whip and, trap or no, heads off to the castle to save his girlfriend and his girlfriend's sister and bring nasty old Dracula to justice. Now, it's not the most socially progressive story ever, I know, and it's basically just a butchery of Castlevania lore to help explain why Maria isn't playable like she is in Rondo of Blood, and why there's only 2 people you have to save instead of 4. But other than one brief text crawl at the beginning of the game, it hardly matters at all, just like any of the original Castlevania platformers. It's hard to compare the visuals of this game to that of, let's say, Super Castlevania 4, as you can clearly tell they were designed from 2 completely different aesthetic points of view. From a level design standpoint, Dracula X seems a lot more linear, with deliberate enemies laid out. The backgrounds themselves are super intricate and pretty. The fire effect in the opening stage is really rad. So rad, in fact, that you might get distracted and not notice the gap in the floor. Yep, I should have seen that one coming. I gotta say, even when comparing Dracula X to Rondo of Blood, while it does reuse a bunch of sprites, Dracula X comes out slightly ahead in the scenery department. The fact that some people treat this game like a cheap ripoff just because it sort of tells the same story is a major bummer, because the team who made this game clearly worked super hard to make it its own thing. And other than keeping a few visuals, the game is really polished. The colors are bright and clean, the enemies and environments are pretty varied, and they all look great. But the best takeaway from Dracula X's design has to be the music. Holy crap, just listen to that opening bass line in the first stage. That's some good late 80s / early 90s music right there. Even though most of the music in this game is redone versions of music from previous Castlevanias, it sounds new and gives it a lot of different life. It could have easily just been the same music from Super Castlevania 4, but you can tell they took some time to make this soundtrack a lot more funky. Now, given this is the 4th Castlevania game I've played, it's hard to draw a line between what's new and what's old, what inspired the new in the game, and what was clearly a rehash. And I'm not sure how I feel about it personally. I had to go back and play some Super Castlevania 4 and watch my old video to remind myself of what I really loved and disliked about that game, and see what had changed, especially since I've never played Rondo of Blood. For what it's worth, I feel that Dracula X is a little bit more simple. The enemies that show up in this game aren't as unfair as previous games. It doesn't mean it's not hard because, yeah, this is Castlevania, and there are moments where it does have insane, dumb bullshit you can't control, but the game looks and feels different enough to give it its own 2 feet as a Castlevania game. Now, just in case we're still not entirely clear on this, here's what I'm looking for Dracula X. A hard, precise, unforgiving platformer meant to kill you over and over again until you get perfect at it, move on to the next part, get stuck again, so on and so forth until you've mastered every last bit. And you know what? For the most part, it totally delivers. All Richter can really do is walk around, jump, fling his whip in one set direction, and use one of 5 magical sub-weapons, which you can get and collect ammo for by breaking wall candles with your whip. It's your typical Castlevania fare, but with a few tweaks and added little things to make this game stand out just a little bit more. For example, quickly tapping jump twice gives you a little nice backflip move. You can jump up and down stairs. And for a few more hearts, each sub-weapon has an alt known as an item crash, which deals much more damage and hits a much larger portion of the screen when activated. Also, and I know this seems like such a nothing thing, but shoutouts to whoever had the incredible idea of dropping your old sub-weapon onto the floor whenever you picked up a new one, just in case you didn't mean to, and you'd rather go back and grab the one you previously had. This saved me a bunch of times through my multiple playthroughs, and I hope whoever came up with it got a goddamn raise because holy crap, This is so important in Castlevania for me. Dracula X is a simple yet well-designed game that's probably much closer to what people originally thought of when they imagined Castlevania on the SNES. It's got lots of great little isolated enemy encounters and complicated platforming segments, and it gives you plenty of opportunities to go, how do I beat this? And then eventually you'll perfect it. And the boss fights perfectly walk the line between satisfyingly punishing and hopelessly unfair. But don't get me wrong, good as it may be, even the best games can have their fair share of flaws. For example, in stages 6 and 7, this idea of fair but brutal design completely goes out the freaking window. It still introduces new enemies and teaches you how to beat them, like the Ghost Skull for example, but then the game kinda has a bad habit of never really letting you use what you've learned before deciding to screw with you and putting the skull somewhere really awkward, like on a series of moving gears where the knockback from getting hit causes a chain reaction that can sap half your health bar before you can even blink. Instead of being proud of finally figuring something out, I often just ended up frustrated because it felt like the game left me out to dry. Oh, okay, so you think you have the spear guy figured out, huh? Now try and make this jump in stage 6 with the spear guy standing exactly where he'll always hit you. Hope you brought the right sub-weapon, or you're just gonna have to get lucky, huh? And there's a lot of jumping parts that quickly become complete BS, where it's no longer about being good at the game, it's about knowing how unnatural and illogical the jumping sometimes is. And by the late game, there's so many screens that aren't so much about figuring out how they work as they are about cheesing the mechanics enough that you can barely scrape by with good luck. There's actually a lot of things like this in the game that just seem unfair for the sake of being unfair, especially since the game does almost nothing to communicate to you the proper way to get past a lot of this stuff. There's a few intentional dead ends or pathways that require you to loop back through a couple of screens you've already beaten just to get back to where you were. And sometimes, even after a boss has died, some unpredictable part of their death animation can suddenly do so much damage to you that you can die even after you thought you won. What is even the point of that besides making me want to put the game back in the box and sell it to the game chasers? Still, if I'm giving the game the benefit of the doubt, a lot of the stuff does seem to be included by design, and maybe someone from 1995, when gaming culture was much different, might be happy the game is so challenging because it means more playtime before reaching the end. It gets me thinking that maybe we were meant to be spending a little more time in these levels than we probably think we should have to today. And as someone who's good at games, this was understandably a little frustrating. And actually, that's what I'm gonna go with here. Because for as much as this game made me rage, there's so many things in here that constantly reminded me like, oh yeah, there was totally a time before the internet could instantly ruin a game like this and give away all of its secrets. And there are literally tons of little secret locations and mechanical tricks scattered all over every stage, with absolutely no clues to help you find them. There were hidden sub-weapons to help me easy mode certain bosses, hidden health power-ups and hearts, and even a couple of secret exits that led me to completely different branching stages. It's a really cool feeling to stumble on something you didn't know was there, like you actually found out something nobody else knew about. I think it's what made these lo-fi games so immersive for us back then, and why games like Dark Souls and Breath of the Wild get so much love today. Is it really impossible for the average person to not immediately spoil everything about a game on Twitter? I guess yes, kind of. My point is, for what it is, Castlevania Dracula X is a pretty big success. Yes, it's balls hard, and yes, it seems like it hates you sometimes, but it looks good, and it controls good, and the music is incredible. And yes, while it is technically inferior in some ways to a totally separate game called Rondo of Blood, looking at this game on its own, I think I actually like this game more than I liked Super Castlevania 4, and that's saying a lot because I loved that game. It was freaking awesome. Ah yes, the one caveat of most retro action platformers. In a short, hard game that's almost completely about skill, what you see is what you get, except for maybe a few basic collectibles along the way, and that's exactly the case for Dracula X. There are exactly 3 endings to get in this game, and which one you get depends only on whether or not you're able to save Annette and her sister Maria. And other than a few clues you can find in the manual about the rare key sub-weapon, and the fact that the sisters are hidden along branching paths somewhere in the castle, you're pretty much on your own to figure out how to do it. And trust me, that in itself is a pretty tough challenge to make all happen. In Stage 3, there's a portion in which it's super easy to fall into some pits, like the game really wants you to, and sends Medusa heads at you just to trip you up. If you fall in, it takes you straight to an alternate Stage 4, but if you want to complete the game, avoid this at all costs. Once you finally clear this, you run into a wall of those weird fire-breathing boneheads, and shortly after that is a hallway with a bunch of candles. It's completely missable, and there's no real clue to it being here, but just make sure you hit the very last one with your whip, because inside is the precious key, which takes up your sub-weapon slot the entire time you're holding it. Then you have to beat the boss and get halfway through real Stage 4, and you'll find a door to use the key on that leads you to Maria. One girl down. Now everything in your body will still want you to finally ditch that key and get back to whomping on dudes with those sub-weapons, but do not do this. You still need that freaking key. Fight your way through a few more screens, which, if you haven't figured out yet, is super hard because you literally cannot have died this entire time since back in Stage 3, and boom, you'll find another locked door which leads you out of this stage without even fighting the boss, and takes you straight to an alternate Stage 5. Continue through until about 80% of the way through the level, when you get to a room halfway filled with water and a little spout near the top left corner. This is where I really got frustrated because there's literally nothing else like this in the game. But to save Annette, you actually have to have the foresight to break the spout so the water drains out, finally revealing her location. But don't get too excited or you'll fall to your death first. But anyway, with Annette finally free, only Dracula awaits. Just a quick little thing right here. How the heck was she able to survive down here while it was filled with water? Am I the only person that was thinking about that? You get the bad ending if you defeat Dracula without saving anyone. You get the good ending if you just save Maria, and you get the perfect ending if you figure out that freaking water spout in Stage 5 and finally save your girlfriend. There's a few other differences too, like fighting death in Stage 6 instead of Carmilla if you're able to save Annette, but the endings themselves are super anticlimactic. All 3 of them play the exact same cutscene, but depending on which one you get, it shows a different picture while the credits roll. It's not even in color, it's just a weird sepia tone, and honestly, these pictures don't even make any sense. How does this communicate the idea of, yay, we're all free? Doesn't it seem like Maria is kind of crying or something? And doesn't Annette look pretty sad? What emotions are you feeling, guys? Tell me. Forget it, we're good. We are all good. Let's do this. In my completionist playthrough of Castlevania Dracula X, there were 9 stages conquered, 10 bosses defeated, 3 playthroughs total, 15 hours and 49 minutes of total playtime, 425 total deaths, and 15 minutes of straight up dancing on a staircase because goddamn the music in this game is tight. With its simple mechanics and brutal difficulty, Castlevania Dracula X was practically a blast from the past in its own time. There's only 7 stages in a basic playthrough, but for the average gamer unfamiliar with the series, I could see a single run through the castle taking days. It's neat to see a few different stages and fight a new boss on Stage 6, and I guess trying to beat the levels with the key is kind of a fun challenge, but a single different picture or 2 isn't really a reward so much as it's a gold star. Good job, dude! 4 more stars and you can get an extra juice box at snack time. But for now, go to sleep. Castlevania Dracula X on the SNES is a fascinating title. It's brutal as they all are. It looks really good. The music is awesome. Probably my favorite in the series so far. But looking at the bare bones of it, it's very much Castlevania, the very first Castlevania specifically. They took out some of the neat polish and features from Castlevania 4, Super Castlevania 4 to be precise, but I think looking at what we got here, we have a brutal game that offers a lot of replayability that may or may not be worth it to the average gamer out there. So, with that in mind, guys, I give this game my completionist rating of finish it.
finish it!
That's all the time we have for today, guys, so please, as always, let me know about today's episode somewhere on the internet. If you liked what you saw here today, do me a favor, give me a thumbs up and leave a comment in the boxes below. Tell me what retro games you want to see more of here on the show. I don't do them as often as I like to, but I am definitely a retro gamer, and it's something that I never forget about. It's where all my roots are, and they always will be, especially in the retro gaming community. If you're new here and you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button in the circle beneath me, and if you missed last week's video on Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, give it a click in the box below. That's all, guys, and I'll see you all next time. Take it easy.